Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience in holding. We now have your presenters in conference. Please be aware each of your lines is in a listen-only mode. Today's presentation will include a video. If you're dialed into the audio conference, please choose the drop-down arrow located beside the green speaker icon at the top of your webinar platform and choose Mute Conference Audio Only. You may submit your questions electronically anytime using the chat pod located to the right of your webinar platform. You may also download a copy of today's presentation using the Files pod located directly below the presentation. It is now my pleasure to turn the conference over to today's first presenter, Chris Hund.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the country or the world. Thanks for joining us today for the October AHA Team Training Monthly Webinar. This one is Hardwiring TeamSTEPPS into Trauma Resuscitations, Optimizing Tar Heel Trauma Care. And this is going to be a really interesting, innovative presentation. As you just heard, we're going to be showing some videos. We're going to be doing some live streaming as well. So a lot of fun stuff today. No worries with that live streaming. Yeah, you can see them, but they can't see you. So no worries if you're eating lunch or hanging out in your PJs somewhere. Just a few notes, other notes today. Like we just heard, the presentation will include a lot of videos. So look up at the top. You've got a little speaker microphone up there, and what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to click on it, on that little arrow to the right, and click Mute Audio, Conference Audio Only. So that's what you need to do to be able to hear the videos if you're listening to this via phone. If you're listening to this on your computer, you don't have to worry about anything. All right, we're also going to do a Q&A at the end like we always do. Please chat in your questions as we go because this kind of helps us build a really nice, robust Q&A session at the end that we could have with the presenter. So as you think of something, type it in over in that chat pod on the right. We got a couple other events coming up I wanted to tell you about. We have one coming up in Orlando, Florida called Gaming in TeamSTEPPS, Where to Begin. We've had this folks from Nemours down in Orlando at the Children's Hospital do a presentation at the national conference every year for the past 3 years, and we decided what a great way to really try to get this to more people. What you're going to do is you're going to learn really how to be how to help people taking your course be active participants. So this is really a way to help you refresh your TeamSTEPPS movement at your own hospital or come up with new ways of spreading it in your hospital. So it's a one-day course. It'll be tons of fun. You play a lot of games and really learn how to design things. We've just announced next year's national conference. It's in San Antonio. It's in June 12th through 14th. This is a conference that we're always very proud of because the people that present at the conference are all of you. It's really a do-it-yourself, built up from the community event where people submit to us their ideas and we build it from them. So it's a conference made by you, for you. It's going to be in San Antonio. We had a great time last year in San Diego, so looking forward to continuing that. It's going to be the 8th conference that we've had. A couple other events coming up. We have master training courses at Duke University, so a little bit of a rivalry with our Tar Heels that we have on the presentation today. And we also will have one in New Orleans at Tulane University, December 6th and 7th. That's a great time to go to New Orleans, so if you've been thinking of taking in a master training course, either of those are great locations, especially as winter is coming upon us in a lot of parts of the country. 2 more webinars for free coming up in 2018. Next month we have Improving TeamSTEPPS in Medical Education, a student veteran-inspired initiative to improve behaviors and understand barriers. Excited by this one because we have 2 medical students who are coming into medicine from other careers. Coming in to present what they're doing at Rutgers University Medical School. And then December 11th, we're having a presentation on how to connect TeamSTEPPS with just culture. And so that is going to be with a two individuals, Lynn Fricke and Ronnie McKinnon, who we've worked with tons on TeamSTEPPS training, and really interested to hear their perspective on just culture. As always, you can contact us if you ever have any questions over email or the phone. It's on the screen right now. Of course, if you have any problems during the webinar, just use that chat box that you see on the right-hand side. All right, without further ado, I'm going to be introducing today's presenters. We have Dr. Daryhl Johnson. He is the Adult Trauma Medical Director at UNC School of Medicine. Elizabeth Schroeder, the Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for UNC Hospitals. And Alberto Bonifacio, who is the Trauma Program Manager with UNC Hospitals. And you can see him on screen right now. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it over. Oh, there's Dr. Johnson too. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to you guys, and looking forward to this presentation.
Awesome, thank you.
Orange County 911, what's the address of the
Hi, we have an accident on Dairyland and Bethel Hickory. A biker just got hit.
Need an ambulance?
Yes, we need an ambulance.
Okay. Was he hit by a vehicle?
Yes, she was hit by a vehicle.
Okay.
She's bleeding from her ear and from her face.
Dairyland Road and Bethel Hickory Grove Church Road, motor vehicle collision with injuries.
Oh, God.
Medic 9, be advised, is upgraded to emergency traffic.
Thank you, Rachel and Stephanie, and good afternoon, everyone. For the record, we are great friends with Duke, and we work together very well, except for basketball and football. So I just want to put that on the record. But what you just heard was the real 911 call of a patient, which really could be any of us. In 2017, trauma killed over 230,000 people, which is almost the population of Durham, North Carolina, to the neighboring state. So really, it affects anyone, really at any age, and most of the time it's sudden and unexpected. In this case, this was a 911 call for a cyclist who was enjoying a beautiful Sunday fall morning, biking down one of the scenic Chapel Hill roads when she was struck by a car. So in a moment, people who are affected by trauma, their lives are not only changed and sometimes lost. By the time this patient got to her, she was in pretty bad shape. She had a lot of broken bones in her face. Her airway, windpipe was filling up with fluid. Her blood pressure was low. She was in shock. She had popped a lung, so her oxygen levels were very, very low. She had broken limbs everywhere. And in the 5 minutes or so it took for her to come to us, we had to mobilize an entire system, assemble a multidisciplinary team to organize themselves, prepare the environment, receive the patient, rapidly and systematically find things that's going to kill the patient, and then fix it. And they got one shot at this. So it's really an important thing for us to look at this and not forget, though we're going to be talking about TeamSTEPPS and Deming and Kotter. We'll talk about how simulations contributed to this response and some cool things that we're doing with research in situational awareness, to not forget that this is really a story about the patients, their families, and the teams who work every day to save them. So before we dive into that, I'd like to reintroduce Dr. Daryhl Johnson, our friendly neighborhood trauma surgeon, who's going to tell us a little bit more about who we are as a trauma center and the project that we launched all this.
Awesome. Thanks for that intro, Al. Like Al said, we're excited to do this for the country and the world, I guess, possibly. And we're always eager to share our experience, and hopefully that somebody can learn something that contributes to better care of patients potentially across the world. So just a little bit of background about us. We are a 900-bed tertiary care center in North Carolina. We are verified by the American College of Surgeons as a level 1 and pediatric level 1 hospital. And also we maintain that all level of verification from our state office of emergency management. Where we sit is in the central part of the state, actually. And so we have a reason, motivation to be good. Not only do we serve our local constituency with patient care, but we're responsible from a regional standpoint. The state of North Carolina is organized very well from a trauma system standpoint. And here you see a depiction of the center of the state. These are counties. The Carolina Blue counties are the counties that we represent. We provide education. We provide outreach. And so we affect the trauma care of patients across a region. The darker shade of blue that we've already sort of mentioned is the area that Duke covers, and there's another level 1 facility in Raleigh, North Carolina. So between our 3 facilities, we cover a fair amount of patients in the central part of the state. Now, this is our facility. I have the opinion that I think it's a nice-looking facility, but we happen to sit smack dab in the middle of a college campus. And most folks know us from our championship athletic teams. And with that being said, I'm the adult trauma medical director and Al's the trauma program manager, and we came into our duties about the same time. And when we were really kindred spirits. I have a background in athletics. I was a student athlete, so the focus of my interest in research through the years has been teamwork, and Al has extensive military experience. And so when we took over our roles, we sort of had this idea of changing the culture at our facility to be national champions, and sort of to drive that idea, taking it from the military and the athletic world and putting it in the healthcare environment. And so we had to start somewhere. So we set out to sort of get a state of the republic to figure out where we were. And like I said, we are responsible for a lot of people. And, you know, what we do across the continuum of care, it all starts when the patient first arrives at our institution. And so we set out to gather some data of our coworkers to, you know, get an idea anecdotally of how we thought we were doing. So what you see here is a hurricane graph of a survey of our ED nurses. And on the left are barriers that were identified, and on the right is suggestions that were given. And so these were some pretty heavy-hitting thoughts that were given to us that we really took to heart. And, I mean, you see that the trauma process was not followed, even if there was a process, right? There was ineffective leadership. When we'd have, you know, our trauma resuscitation team is essentially an ad hoc crisis team. So we're in a time of crisis, and the leadership that was perceived to be ineffective. The observers who would sometimes be associated or around during trauma resuscitations were perceived to be disruptive. There was ineffective communication. And also about this time we had the implementation of our electronic medical record. So all of that sort of soup gave Al and I the impetus that things, you know, really weren't going as well at the ground level. And some of the suggestions obviously were to redesign the trauma assignments for the nurses, to actually develop a process, adhere to it, to give more education, to help with documentation. Again, like I said, we had the implementation of an electronic medical record. And just a way for everybody to get on the same page when a patient was arriving at our facility. What you see here is a graph of some data. We trained some observers, and they observed 15 traumas. And 3 of the data points that stand out is that less than 80% of the time, we completed the primary survey. Now, what I'm talking about here is ATLS, and I'll talk a little bit more about it as we move forward. But the ATLS process in the primary survey is when you find the most important things, shock and life-threatening things, and you fix it. Well, looking at these observed traumas, we probably did that less than 80% of the time from a perception standpoint. Also looking at this same graph, how many times did we do the secondary survey, which is a complete head-to-toe physical, about 65% of the time. And then from a communication standpoint, it just seemed like things were all over the place. How often were the primary and secondary survey were completed, which is about 45% of the time. If you look over to the right of the screen, we measured the time to obtaining our first set of vitals. And that was really disturbing to me because that was sometimes up to 12 minutes. Well, I just said in the primary survey, we want to find if they shock. And a lot of times, the key component to diagnosing a patient with shock is having a set of vital signs. So we obviously didn't think we were doing a great job there. And then for patients who didn't immediately need to go to the operating room, usually the next step of evaluation is going to the CAT scanner. And we were upwards of almost 30 minutes sometimes of getting the patient to the next level of care. So there is the motivation, and what did we decide to do about it? Well, there was obviously to sort of fix what was going on at the ground level. We also, through one of the institutes here at the University of North Carolina, which is involved with quality improvement, we obtained a seed grant to really do a deep dive into our trauma resuscitation process to, in a nutshell, get things fixed. All right. So what exactly did we want to do? What was the nut that we wanted to crack? And it was we wanted to improve the consistency, the reliability, and the efficiency of our trauma resuscitation, right? Essentially, the efficiency of our ad hoc crisis team. And how we were going to do that was by standardizing our process in the ED, right? So to get that done, we needed to consistently follow the patient assessment ATLS at UNC. We also provided consistent education and training. We wanted to employ direct observation and performance feedback. We harped and focused on the teamwork dynamics, closed-loop communication, and teaching our trainees leadership principles. We are a tertiary coordinating center and a teaching institution. So we do have surgical and emergency medicine residents that a lot of times assume these leadership roles. And the good thing is we actually took a look at the ergonomics of our trauma bed. Is everything in the right place for what people need when they need it? As we always say in athletics, the eye in the sky doesn't mind. So we employ video cameras so that we could record our trauma resuscitations. And this was done for QI purposes. It's not a punitive skill. And what we like to do in a non-threatening environment is allow folks to come and see how the resuscitation went. A lot of times after the adrenaline is slowed down, now you can debrief and figure out, best practices actually for that individual in their education. Again, I keep talking about my athletic background. Practice. Practice was a big motivator for us. So we came up with drills as much as we could and much as we can. We get together as a multidisciplinary team to practice. But we all know that there are barriers in healthcare that we almost kind of overcome, right? When we're at work, we're working. When we're away, we're doing self-care and we're trying to become more resilient. And so what we thought to do was to train every member of the team in an individual group so that when the ad hoc team got together and we did an analysis, and there was up to 21 billion combinations of folks who could show up and be a part of the trauma team, that we would train in the individual groups, get together as much as we could as a solid team, and employ and empower each group to learn the process, to embrace the process, and I always say the process protects itself. We taught courageous conversation where once the process was implemented, if things weren't going the way they should go, how to interact and interrupt to get things back on track. And then we also provided a continuum of care conference because we found out the co-workers who were taking care of patients on the front end a lot of times didn't know what happened to patients on the back end. And so it actually helped with buy-in of the program and with closure because we're all one team along the continuum. So I keep talking about TLS is what we use as a process internationally, which is produced by the American College of Surgeons. And every trauma center usually is following ATLS guidelines. Well, you see here on our slide we say ATLS at UNC because ATLS is the Christmas tree, and every institution sort of have their own quirks, and those are the ornaments. So I always say we have ATLS, which is our Christmas tree, with our Carolina blue ornament. But really the big part for ATLS is the ABCDE paradigm, and A stands for airway, breathing, B stands for breathing, C, circulation, D, disability, and E for exposure. And really the big part of ATLS is that primary survey where we're finding and fixing any injury that's causing shock that can kill the patient right away. Well, remember I said earlier that there were a possible 21 billion combinations of folks who could potentially be a part of this ad hoc crisis team. We needed a way to sort of galvanize the team and who was going to be a part of the team. So we actually implemented having a team huddle when appropriate and timely, and then if it was able to get everybody on the same page. And that also allowed to establish the leadership and for that leader to express his or her thoughts of the points for patient care. At the end, after the evaluation, which constitutes primary and secondary survey, we would move on to DISPO. Remember, I showed that data where we were getting to the CAT scanner really slow. Well, this shared mental model allowed the trauma captain, as I say, to make his or her reality everybody else's reality, and to get everybody back on the same page to be timely. This is sort of a busy depiction of our process, but a big part of it that we broke it down to, and we brought stakeholders across the continuum, our trauma surgeons, our emergency surgeons, our residents, our nurses, our respiratory therapists, everybody involved with being a part of that ad hoc crisis team. We sat down and mapped out the standard process that we wanted to do every time. And that obviously involved prep, having a team huddle. We would take our patient report. We would focus primarily on the primary survey initially, identifying and fixing shock. And as we move through, we would have a complete secondary survey with a clear delineation between the two, so that if anybody walked up to join the resuscitation, they should be able to have a situational awareness of where we were during the resuscitation. And then in the end, the DISPO was the shared mental model of what the next steps would be. Here are the positions, as I call it. I like to make a lot of athletic analogies, but we know that one of the most important positions is at the foot of the bed, which is the quarterback, the trauma captain. But like I said earlier, we wanted to empower all of our team members once the process was learned to protect the process. And at the bottom you see the red line. Remember earlier I said observers were seen to be disruptive. Well, I call the red line the bullpen. And so we have folks back down there who are available and ready to help when called upon, but otherwise they would sort of stick back behind that red line. So what you should be seeing in a second is a quick clip that demonstrates the ATLS process in action.
Fellow acting attending.
I'm Aaron, junior in house.
I'm John, ED resident.
Okay, so the patient's, as far as I know, a 21-year-old male with a gunshot wound. All right, the patient's here.
All right, everybody here needs to be here. Yes?
Yes.
I got a 21-year-old male. He's got a single gunshot wound to the upper left chest. He's got a gunshot wound to the leg. He was in an altercation with his brother who's still currently locked up in PD.
Sir, what's your name? Everyone's intact.
His accent rat sounds on the left side. Okay, get that angio cap and go ahead and press the left chest, midclavicular space, second intercostal. Who's getting my first manual blood pressure? All right, bilateral and femoral pulses. All right, angio cap is in. Excellent, ready. So my last blood pressure. So we're now 63/30. Can we start 2 liters of crystalloid on a pressure bag, and let's get a unit of blood and activate the massive transfusion protocol, please? So let's roll. Aaron, we're going to roll this way so that you can take a look. Make sure that you don't see any other gunshot wounds.
Needles are gone, sharps are gone.
Oh, okay. The needles and sharps are gone.
3.
Okay. And can somebody get some warm blankets? Second unit of blood is done. All right. Are we ready to go to the OR? Ready to go. Let's do it. Bring a cordis kit with us in case we need to throw one in really fast.
Piece of cake, right? So with a $50,000 grant, a rock star trauma surgeon, and an expert program manager, Elizabeth, she sends her regrets. She's not able to join us today. You too can revamp your entire crisis team process. But I hope that gives you a good idea of kind of how the process plays out. So how did we pull this off? It wasn't easy. The struggle is for real. We learned a lot of things along the way. We made some mistakes along the way. So in the next couple of minutes, we thought we would share with you kind of some of the things that we learned, especially with using different QI methodologies, talking about how Kotter is employed in a practical sense, how we emphasize teamwork, communication, and leadership, and how we are embracing this this culture of doing micro experiments or small PDSA cycles. So a show of hands, either virtual hand or live hand, how many people work in a center where you have Lean Six Sigma, TeamSTEPPS, academic research, trauma quality, nursing quality, hospital quality, all working under the same roof? Yeah, so I have some audience who decided to join us. They're all raising their hands. So for the brave ones, you can raise your virtual hand, or you can raise your hand at home because no one can see you. Now, for those that have their hands raised, how many institutions, in your institution, raise your hand, because often these different groups work in silos. Or even sometimes they go to have QI turf wars, where many of these methodologies even conflict. Right, so that is the nature I've learned in many large academic medical centers. So what we learned in this project is to be able to use different QI methodologies to each of their strengths, to blend them, to help synergize them to get the maximum effect. So the PDSA cycle is rooted in Deming. Everyone knows it. This is the common language. So if you talk PDSA across your different lanes, folks will understand it, especially when it comes down to researchers who are going to use the scientific method. Lean Six Sigma is the best method that I've discovered. I'm a Kaizen coach as well on how to dissect processes, identify waste, and find efficiency. So if you're looking at improving your process, find your champions with Lean Six Sigma and engage them. What Lean Six Sigma doesn't do a great job on is teamwork, communication, and leadership, and this is where TeamSTEPPS shines. So the message here is learn how to artfully use these different methodologies to get the most effect for each of your projects. And in doing so, you might actually help to build bridges or advance the culture of a unified quality team in your organization. And I'll talk about Deming. You all should be familiar with this nice penguin graph. But I'm curious to know how many folks have taken this from theory and actually applied it in QI work. So for the folks that have, please chime in to offer some of their wisdom in deploying this. So we'll start at the bottom. Create a sense of urgency. What we learned is a sense of urgency is different to different people. So often when we try to launch a new project, we are speaking towards our sense of urgency, which is very real. But what I would like to suggest is when trying to advance a project, identify what is urgent to the person who you need to act, right? So you're trying to make this real for them. In this case, this is a quality project, and we were applying for a quality grant. So we used quality metrics. What you're seeing here is a caterpillar graph of our TQIP. So the American College of Surgeons benchmarks all of its trauma centers against similar trauma centers in their performance. So we included this in our proposal, and we said, we're not doing so hot in shock, which is exactly what the trauma resuscitation is going to do. So this spoke to and raised flags for our quality people. But then any process can't succeed unless the front line is engaged. So Dr. Johnson a moment ago talked about this survey, so we included that. And we said, look, only 83% of our nurses in the emergency department feel that we provide optimal care for our trauma patients. This is a problem. So we used this as a rallying call for them and got the nursing folks on that board to engage with us. And then lastly, we wanted to speak to the administrators. So I'm learning that the higher you are in the leadership, the more you're concerned a lot with strategy, brand, patient base, and financial solvency. So we said that, and we're not making this up, we said that if we don't fix this, our verification may be in jeopardy, right? They're going to look at us and ask what we have done to help improve our trauma processing. So we looked at them and said, hey, if we don't get the support, our trauma program may be in jeopardy. And no one wants that to happen. The middle of the state, as you saw earlier, would collapse on itself if we lost our level 1 trauma verification. So create the sense of urgency to whoever it is you are speaking with. Secondly, build a guiding team. So I think we do a great job of already building representative teams with all the different perspectives and lenses looking at a problem. Some of the things that we did was we did a stakeholder analysis, and we identified who are the key stakeholders, defined as those who can ex-nab of whatever process you're doing. Key stakeholders are the ones that can pull the plug at a phone call on anything that you're doing. So we identify those and we engage them, and we put them in the steering committee or a representative of them. So what that does is we had immediate, not just buy-in, but engagement from key stakeholders. And then we identified the rest of the stakeholders who are also very, very important. What this structure does is gave us not only a core group of key stakeholders, but it gave a 5 or 6 member steering committee that we can assemble pretty rapidly and make decisions quickly when we needed to. So it made us more nimble in this process versus trying to convene an entire panel. The third point in this is that we actually included a patient. So a patient, a trauma survivor who was still a staff member, she was actually a member of the ED team when she came in, treated by people she worked with every day. And we asked her to be on the team for one purpose, which is to provide a voice for the patient, to help ground us in that every decision we make was for the benefit of the patient. So these are some things that we learned in terms of building a guiding coalition. Understanding and gaining buy-in, I feel, is where most of the projects just kind of fall flat. This is where we struggle with the most. We have a great plan, and we go to deploy it with treasure and blood, and it just dies on the vine or it fails. We do this thing in healthcare where we sit around in boardrooms and we come up with these beautiful processes, and they look great on a PowerPoint, and the algorithm is perfect after months of deliberation, only to employ it with fatal flaws, and it falls on its face. You lose the trust of everyone in the process. So what we did was, before we took the leap of implementation, we tested it. We modeled the process using high-fidelity simulators. So we took a high-fidelity simulator, and you can do this with just a low-fidelity simulator, but we rolled it down to the ED, and we walked the process through step by step by step in front of the entire team and anyone else who was on the floor that day that wanted to watch. So what this did was it helped us to identify flaws in the process that you could never identify on that beautiful PowerPoint that we did. In fact, an ED nurse that was watching said, hey, why is it that the trauma surgeon is always standing to the left of the patient? Because I can never hear that person when they're doing the call out, so I missed a bunch of this stuff. And we talked and talked and talked, and the best thing that we could come up with was that a godfather in surgery long ago said that surgeons should always stand to the left of the patient. So that's how it rolled. So we said, well, why don't we flip it? Let's try it. So that one comment had us flip the entire process. It worked. And through this modeling, we pretty much unearthed decades worth of of current practice. So that's one thing. We found flaws in the system. We're able to iteratively improve it. The other thing in terms of buy-in is that for the folks in the room, they got a chance to see, feel, and even tinker with the process. So for the folks that were there, I would submit that when they left the room, they at least saw that this process was possible and that there's a chance for it to work, right? So whether they're not a champion, if they weren't a champion, they at least saw it and were willing to give it a try, and now they're vested because they helped with this process. So this is one of the ways that we use simulation to really advance our cause. The next thing is don't let up. So if implementation is hard, sustainment is crazy. You know, how do you sustain transformative culture change over time, especially with us, with itinerant learners? So there's constant turnover in staff and physicians. So how do you sustain that over time? So we are doing monthly trauma simulations, especially for me when I'm like getting skittish and I'm like, oh, the ED's busy. I don't know if we should do this simulation. And the ED champions are just driving it through because they care. So that's one of the ways that we do it. So now we're currently doing trauma simulations where we reinforce the process as well as teamwork behaviors. The other thing is that we studied the process very carefully. So Elizabeth Schroeder, who was managing this project, actually sat on the back, and now we're using cameras to study it. So one, figure out how the process is going, but not in a punitive way, in a very supportive way. By having someone there with a clipboard who the staff trusted and knew that they weren't out to get them, but really is a source to answer questions, a person to give feedback to, and a person collecting data where if things were going sideways, we can immediately change or even stop the process altogether. People say, what about Hawthorne effect? Heck, I want Hawthorne effect. If someone in the back of the room with a clipboard is improving patient care, that's good for me. This is quality work. So this is something that we wanted to do, so long as it's done healthfully. And then lastly, never underestimate the power of a donut. That's probably the key word for the takeaway for this presentation. Celebrate your small wins. Whenever we do a trauma simulation or whenever we achieve something, I just thank the folks with some donuts. And I think that's so important. And then lastly is culture change. How do we know if we've actually changed culture? We have data. We'll get to the data. But I remember having a cup of coffee from with a critical care flight team nurse from our friends across the way. And we were just having coffee, and our conversation turned to this. And this flight nurse looked at me and was like, you guys got it going on with trauma resuscitation. I was like, really? She was like, yeah, you guys are strong. So if anyone would know how well a system trauma process is, it would be these people. Right? It would be the critical care flight team nurse who drops off the sickest and most injured patients to trauma centers across the state, and they sit back and they watch. And they're at the top of their game. So when folks are telling me, hey, your stuff looks good, it's a good indicator. So the message here is anecdotes, stories, and ownership and pride matters. When you're talking about culture, the data says one thing, but the feeling, the ownership, and pride, I think, also count. So that's it. That's Kotter. That's what we learned about Kotter. The other part, third guiding principle is emphasis on teamwork, communication, and leadership. So here you're seeing a chart with a smattering of behavior principles. Many of those are TeamSTEPPS. It's actually a mashup of TeamSTEPPS for resource management and other couple of teamwork principles that we believe in. There are two messages here. The first message is, as TeamSTEPPS champions, we want, with all of our hearts, when we look at processes for teams, to be able to employ all of these principles. The reality is that's not possible often, especially if you're just getting started. Each one of these principles should stand alone as a behavior that, if employed, will help teamwork. So if your team can do one of these behaviors, then they're making an advancement in teamwork and process. So don't try to get them all at once. Get the ones that are most valuable. The other principle here is what you don't see on this chart is TeamSTEPPS, and this is where I'm the heretic of TeamSTEPPS. What you don't see on this chart is TeamSTEPPS. I've learned often that when you're trying to teach this stuff and you say TeamSTEPPS, you lose people at hello. You get the eye roll, and then you say, oh, I didn't take that that mandatory class that you're making me do, that you're forcing me to do, or I have no idea what you're talking about. So what you're left like defending it and you're trying to explain TeamSTEPPS, we totally lost them. If it's a TeamSTEPPS unit, jazz them up. Talk them all day long about TeamSTEPPS. We love it. But if it's a resistant unit, speak to the behaviors on their own. So for the resistance units, when you're talking about these teamwork behaviors, instead of talking about TeamSTEPPS, you say, hey, listen, when something important happens on this code or this trauma, call it out so the whole team knows. Makes sense, right? And you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And you, charting nurse, if someone calls it out, acknowledge it so that they know that they heard. Say an got it, thank you, or if it's really important, repeat it, and that'll make sense. So you're teaching these behaviors without the barrier of the brand, let's say. So the message here is that TeamSTEPPS is a means to an end, the end being good patient care. I don't care if folks know about TeamSTEPPS, if they're employing these behaviors, I think we capture it here. And then we can talk about the brands later. The last principle is this idea of just try it. Another thing that we tend to do is we tend to sit around conference rooms and we mull over a little detail over and over and over and trying to get the perfect answer, where if we would have just tried it, we would have found out. You know, you have to do this responsibly depending on risk or whatever. If you're talking about rearranging something on a shelf, instead of like agonizing over where it goes, just try it out. Even if it's a 1 or 2 events or traumas, it'll help dislodge that constant cycle of this is how we've always done it. And you can see we had it baked into our plan. We knew that once we got it started, that we would identify little things along the way, and these micro experiments would happen. A couple of examples. This is us, the picture to your right is us visiting the Great Joy Klein in Parkland, picking her brain, and she's allowing us to feel all the different ideas that we can do with micro experiments. This stretcher that's in the middle, we saw in her shop, and we were like, oh my God, that's the coolest stretcher. So we went and got some, and it really made a big difference. The middle picture is a sign created by an ED nurse of the Glasgow Coma Scale. We went through about 5 or 6 iterations, and we finally landed on this, and it's brilliant. It's now right across the room from the person performing the assessment. It works very, very well. This one on the bottom right shows a curtain. Everyone's complaining about the room is too small, the room is too small. Folks couldn't do anything about it, and the nurse was just like, hey, why don't we move the curtain back there? So we tried it. We left the other track up in case it didn't work, but it worked. It opened up all of the square footage. So we, along the way, had all of these little micro experiences that's going to work. So I hope these guiding principles or these little tips that we learned along the way would be helpful. One of the other things that we've learned is how to hardwire it. Is that when you're trying to do this work, there are many great facilitators out there that know how to debrief, but it takes a special skill for them to identify teamwork behaviors as they see it. So I thought we'd take a couple of minutes to try a grand experiment. We'll see what happens. And the grand experiment is we are going to do a lightning, real-time debrief of a trauma simulation using a webinar chat platform. How about that? You guys ready for this? Hey, I got a kicker. So here's I'll tell you a kicker in a second. So what I want you guys to do, and we'll see if this works, this grand experience works, is to take this, you should have already gotten it, or take your TeamSTEPPS manual out with the different behaviors, and we're going to show this film. And when you see something, I want you to type it in the chat box. If you don't see something, just put like no huddle or no feedback or something, and it'll help us, I guess, as a group, learn to identify things in real time. So folks that just want to sit back and watch, go ahead and sit back, but we'll see what happens. The kicker is, though, if we're going to go back in this video, and if we identify the most engaged person who's giving us the most kind of feedback, we are going to email you guys a certificate to our upcoming 30th anniversary partial trauma conference. So I'm just curious to see what kind of feedback we get on the chat. But yes, for the one that's most engaged, we're gonna email you a certificate to our fabulous conference coming up. So let's see what happens. So if you could, so let me set the stage for you. So this is the trauma alert that came in. This is right off of my phone. This is what our trauma pages look like. So adult red simulation, 28-year-old female, high-speed ODC. She's 7 months pregnant. There's bruising on her abdomen. You got 6 minutes, and she's coming to our trauma bay, which is room 2. So I'm going to cut into the trauma that's already in progress. They've done the huddle. They did a great job on the huddle, so we'll give that. They did the primary assessment. It was flawless. But then with any good simulation, things happen. So here we go. All right, so chat.
All right, patient's intubated. And we're hooked up to the ventilator. Let's send an ABG. We're at 4 minutes. One. We're going to go ahead and do a C-section. Go for it. Let's just, guys. All right, 4 minutes now. Okay, let's do a pulse check and a rhythm check on our own while they're beginning their incision. Pulse check, what do we feel?
Nothing.
I do not feel what's our rhythm check? CPR? Rhythm check? Can we shock again?
Yes.
Charge. Continue CPR while we're charging.
All right, I am ready to shock.
Pull up the nanny up.
All right, hands clear?
Good. Clear, we're shocking. We're shocking.
It's clear. Shock, everybody clear, clear, clear.
Shock.
Go.
Hands back.
CPR. Yeah.
Where's our Nikki team?
I think we'll need empty. Okay, go ahead and get BiPAR and power down as well. They're bringing baby's running up here. They got to get here. You're running up.
All right, okay.
748. Here's 300 minutes. And then we get our labs and send our ABG. And we're hanging. We're on massive transfusion protocol. We have our blood hanging.
You're 308. I need to know EC2.
7.5.
Okay. 1 minute pulse. All right, pulse check.
I do not feel.
Do we feel a pulse?
You do.
We do.
All right, so that was a 1.5 minute clip of a trauma simulation. And you can see, so thanks for all the folks that have been chiming in. I hope you found that little exercise and helping to identify things useful. It just takes a trained eye, and you just need to watch this over and over and over. When we code traumas, and I have folks on the team who are doing this, sometimes it takes 4 times to view a single trauma to really tease out all of these behaviors. So it's a good thing to develop in terms of teamwork. So what did we see? So if this was the original trauma setup that you saw, we now had to add an OB team, and then we now had to add the NICU team to take care of the baby. And then you have the dozen or so other folks who wanted to learn standing around. So in many cases, this was one of the toughest scenarios to actually do and to tease out what was happening. And this is what we really practice to improve. So I'm seeing some lines on the chat. If you have other feedback, positives and negatives, or things that we can improve on, please continue to provide that feedback. Okay, so what does this mean? How are we doing it? So after all of this, are we making any difference? Here's what we found. So I'm going to show you a couple of graphs really to create just to set an example, and then we'll show you some results kind of how we've been doing over time. So this first graph shows our time to log roll. As Daryl mentioned, log roll is the differentiation between primary and secondary assessment. So the biggest change we made to ATLS is that instead of making the log roll at the very end, we put it in the middle. So we wanted to time how long it took to do the log roll as a surrogate to say, are we following the new process? And you can see we've been making time along the way, right? And then towards the end, you see that not only has the time to log roll been decreasing, but the variability has also decreased. So improving in time, and we're decreasing variability. So in a process, that's very, very, very good. The other reason why we studied it is we can pick up blips. As you can see, number 4, we said, wow, why are these two like off the charts? Why are they outliers? Well, it just took longer time to get the vital, so it's acceptable. In this example, chest x-ray is now supposed to be done in the primary assessment. We wanted to see how fast we can do it. Plus, we bought these fancy new stretchers. Is it making a difference? And you can see pretty dramatically where that line is pointing, that once we got the stretcher, our time just really went down, and again, the shot groups got tighter. And then we had these two big outliers towards the end, so we asked why. There was a change in radiology leadership, and it wasn't emphasized on their end. So the message here is, without studying this, we would have never been able to pick up on that and address the matter. All it was some simple re-education, and we were back on track. So how are we doing? I'm taking risks, so I guess I'll show it anyway. I'll show it here. These data were just handed to me. Special thanks to Alex, Kelsey, and Kyle, who worked really hard to produce this, of how we're doing over time. So the first blue bar is our baseline data. The red bar is the data we collected during the one-year implementation. The green bar is 19 months after, and that last bar to the right is 2 years later. So we're now looking at the sustainment of a process over 2 years. Without getting really into the details, you can study this later and know that the last bar is only an N of 12. So we started to code random traumas to see how we're doing. So I want to emphasize that the N is very low. So it may not be truly representative of what's happening, but it's a good indicator. But the message here across the board is it really follows the implementation graph over time. You have high compliance when we're studying it really well, and then a slow decay in the process. I will say much slower than other processes. But you can expect a return. The inertia is going to pull it back down. And you can very clearly see that in some of our metrics. So what does this tell us, right? We have to go back and we have to try it again. We have to re-educate. We have to push it again. But we need a booster shot. So we're not showing the greatest data in the world, but it's very real data. The struggle is real. We have to go back in and we have to retrain some. Hopefully the data will change as we get more videos coded, but this is a very real picture of how things happen. And then lastly, this is what a house supervisor told us. We unfortunately had a very similar trauma to the pregnant simulation that we saw. And this is what one of the house supervisors wrote. So this stuff makes a difference. For this person, that simulation that you just watched really made a difference in the life of a true patient. So, all right, Doc.
Thanks. So I just want to piggyback on something that Al said. We know we have a system where people come and go. We're a coordinator center. We have residents who have an uptick in their responsibilities. We have residents who leave. We have new residents that come in. We have new attendings and staff that come and go, and they've seen the process done differently at different situations. So as Al said, that booster will be really important because now we have to reset the ship. But a big part in riding the ship is what we're using from an innovation standpoint to get over the barriers of the time crunch of what we do. And this is one of those innovations where we're using, if you remember from the first simulation, our fellow was wearing eyewear. And what it gives is her first-person experience on top of the third-person experience from the video camera that's in the up in the trauma bay to, number one, help teach her leadership responsibilities or teach the training leadership responsibilities. And also it helps to help them get an idea of how they're doing from a teamwork standpoint. I think the leadership part was really important because we can teach our residents to cut and sew, but there was no formal leadership course or conference that our trainees were going through. And so, you know, culture is all about buy-in, and once we started this project, the residents were all clamoring to be a part of it, and it reignited the excitement, and it made the sense that trauma resuscitations matter. And even though we're engaged with educating every member of the team, the top with the leadership and the teamwork and teaching those principles to our trainees really invigorated just the whole perception of working with trauma patients. Also, remember I mentioned from that preliminary data, we sort of had the launch of our electronic medical record. And that's has had its ups and downs, but it's also, we're using this innovation to sort of help, guide our way on how to be efficient with the trauma process and to help our documentation and nurses in the trauma bay. So this is this first-person video that we use for feedback.
Airways intact, thank you.
All right, sir. Big breath in and out. Bilateral airways are equal.
The dot that you see on the screen is the gaze pattern and actually what the wearer's pupils are focusing on.
Strong bilateral femoral pulses.
Strong pulses, thank you.
So that's just an example of how we're trying to be innovative to get past the barriers that we know exist in trying to create and sustain a championship culture here at UNC. Well, in the end, while I'm, waiting on it to load, we just, again, want to say thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to share our work and from our entire trauma program that works really hard on making us one of the best in the state and in the region and in the country. We are really happy and excited to share this work.
Okay, thank you. So I think we'll have a couple of minutes to take questions.
Thank you both, guys. That was really great, and I really enjoyed getting to see the videos and the interactive portion of it with people getting to kind of type in and vote in, so that was great. We had a question come in about debriefing and about how you're working to improve your debriefing, using these different tools and what exactly you're doing with that.
So in terms of debriefing real traumas, we are now using the overhead video footage that you saw in the simulation as a way to look back at what happened, how folks reflect. So now really employing deliberate practice. So in several traumas, we've had just clinicians come, as well as teams say, let me watch this other trauma and actually look to see what they could be doing better. The ED nurses now are using this footage on monthly meetings to review that and see how we could do better. So we'll select really rich footage or really rich trauma case and then use it as a debrief tool. The eye tracker, we hope to soon use that also as a
That's great. So what do you do for some of those, trauma cases? If there's anything live that you're using, how do you handle patient consent?
So we work very closely with our legal department. We have some controls in place to make sure that HIPAA is protected and that this footage is absolutely secure.
Got it. Thank you. We talked some throughout a little bit about what you've been doing with, trying to get buy-in and encourage people to take ownership. You talked a little bit about, going into, kind of in almost like a stealth mode to bring some of the, materials out to people and not to talk about things using their big brand name, but talk about them as solutions to problems they might have. You talked a little bit about also the importance of doing those micro experiments and try to get people just to try things, and then they'll start seeing that there's some successes, and not to talk over and over again. But how do you encourage, continue to encourage buy-in? One of the questions is here, is there something that you have to keep working on this? People say, okay, we've tried that already, or yeah, we have success, we've done it, and they kind of forget about it. How do you keep that continuous process going?
I think one of the things we like to encourage here is perfection by progress. So we engaged every stakeholder. This is not a top-down sort of process. We engage stakeholders all the time. As I said, we have unfortunately a revolving door sometimes where you have personnel that come from other places. So we're always engaging on how we can be better. And I think that creates buy-in. I think, there's some accountability that we've had to add to it to make sure that we stick to what we're doing. But for the most part, when we started this project, it, revitalized and added vigor to wanting to be a part of, Tar Heel trauma and be a part of the team. So I think just that sustainment has come from us continually reaching out to everyone as an equal partner and equal stakeholder. As I said, the process protects itself, and I think that's been a big part of keeping people engaged.
Have you thought about doing any sort of spread, into the other departments that you connect with, be it, as people are you're handing them off to surgery, or you're, receiving them? Have you, started to spread your tentacles outside of the trauma world to those related areas?
Yes. We work, our tentacles have spread in the institution and working with other ad hoc crisis teams, and also learning from other ad hoc crisis teams such as code teams, et cetera, and how we can better train our own team. But yes, word has gotten around, and we always like to say we like, Tar Heel trauma, we're leading the way. And so any, forward progress, which also includes failing forward, we're, always happy to be a part of.
Sounds good. Well, I'd like to thank you both for doing this. We're at the top of the hour, and this is really interesting and engaging, and great to see material coming at us in different ways. So I really appreciate it. I bet you everybody else did too. So thank you very, very much.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's presentation. You may now disconnect.